10% increase in ultra-processed food in your diet, you're going to have a 13% higher overall risk of cancer, an 11% higher risk of breast cancer, and a 30% higher risk for colon cancer, and a 50% increased risk for pancreatic cancer, which is almost universally deadly. Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Hyman, and welcome to Health Bites. Today, we're confronting a pressing issue that's been grabbing headlines everywhere: the alarming rise in cancer among young people. Now, early onset cancer rates are up nearly 80% from 1990 to 2019. That is terrifying. In the US alone, the American Cancer Society estimates over 2 million new cancer cases that will show up in 2024. We're seeing significant spikes in cancers of the digestive system like colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, uterine cancer, and lung cancers. And notably, colorectal cancer has become a leading cause of cancer deaths, particularly striking men under 50 and rising as a major concern for young women. But why? What's driving this influx of cancer rates in younger generations? That's exactly what we're going to cover in today's episode of this podcast. And unlike the news and social media, I'm not just going to spotlight the problem. I'm going to offer real research-backed solutions. We'll delve into the root cause of cancer and explore the impact of chronic inflammation and how our everyday lifestyle choices are creating a cancer-feeding frenzy, accelerating biological aging, and discuss actionable steps to mitigate these risks. From the importance of early screening to diet and reducing exposure to environmental toxins, my goal is to help you get equipped with practical strategies to take control of your health. Now, cancer is increasing in young people. The rate of more than a dozen cancers has been increasing since the 1990s, especially among young adults. So what types of cancers are on the rise? Well, it's estimated that in 2024, there will be over 2 million cancer cases in the US alone, equal to about 5,480 new diagnoses every single day, over 600,000 cancer deaths. Digestive system cancers, which affect esophagus, stomach, small intestine, colon, rectal, and pancreas, are the biggest ones. And then there's, for women, the biggest, which is breast, and prostate, uterine, and respiratory cancers rank the highest among all the new cases. Now, could our ultra-processed diet be to blame? Well, I think so. In a 2023 systematic review in The Lancet exploring the relationship between ultra-processed food and cancer risk, 9 out of 11 studies found a positive association between ultra-processed food and all cancers except prostate cancer. Now, each 10% increase in ultra-processed food in the diet correlated, well, you got to get this, just 10% increase. And there's, by the way, the average American has about 60% of their diet is ultra-processed food, and kids at 67%. If you have a 10% increase in ultra-processed food in your diet, you're going to have a 13% higher overall risk of cancer, an 11% higher risk of breast cancer, and a 30% higher risk for colon cancer, and a 50% increased risk for pancreatic cancer, which is almost universally deadly. That's terrifying. And this is even more infuriating because recently the Dietary Guidelines Committee of America for a dietary guidelines said that there's not enough data to say ultra-processed foods make you gain weight, and they basically didn't look at anything else. Well, we know that they both make you obese, diabetic, and cause a host of other diseases, including cancer. So let's take this from a framework of functional medicine. What is the root cause? Like, how do we get to the root cause of cancer? What's going on when we're seeing such a rapid spike in cancer cases? Well, people are getting sicker younger, and they're aging at an accelerated rate. I mean, across the board, not just for cancer, but everything else. Diabetes. I mean, like, I talked about this before, but, we used to call, now we call type 2 diabetes. We used to call it adult onset diabetes because we never saw it in kids. Now we see it in kids all the time. And it's because of their crappy diet. A new research presented at this year's American Association for Cancer Research annual meeting revealed that people born in or after 1965 might be experiencing accelerated cell aging, which could be driving cancer at an earlier age. And in fact, researchers from the University of Washington School of Medicine reported that accelerated aging was associated with higher risks of developing early onset cancers, such as lung cancer, 42% increased risk, GI cancers, 22% increase, uterine cancer, 36% increase, and genetics only account for a small portion of that variability in longevity, about 25%. It's probably not even that much. What's really driving our accelerated aging is our epigenome, which is how our genes are expressed based on everything we do to them every day. What we eat, our lifestyle, toxins in our environment, and these things can all turn on cancer genes. So there's a huge role of our diet in driving cancer, particularly sugar and starch. And we'll talk about that. And environmental toxins, which are increasingly on the rise. Petrochemical, plastics, phthalates, endocrine disrupting cancers, heavy metals, you name it. We've done a lot of discussions on the Doctor's Pharmacy podcast about this. Now, I talk about this in my book, Young Forever. We'll link to it in the show notes. But there's a number of things that go wrong as we get older, all of which can contribute to cancer, right? We call these the 10 hallmarks of aging. There's now like 13, but they're basically more or less the same. People don't really understand this, but there's a huge link between type 2 diabetes, prediabetes or metabolic syndrome, obesity, and the risk for a whole slew of cancers. So if your blood sugar is out of whack and your insulin is out of whack and you have some degree of insulin resistance, you are at much higher risk of a whole host of cancers. Not all cancers, but all the big ones that are killing us. Colorectal cancer, liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, uterine cancer, and many other cancers. I mean, smoking used to be the biggest risk factor. Now, it's our food. And it's all the other comorbidities that are driving cancer. So 4 to 8% of all cancers are attributed to obesity. I think it might even be more than that, but that's on a conservative note. Obesity is associated with 40% greater odds of early onset colon cancer and rectal cancer. So if you're obese, you have 40% higher risk of getting early onset colon and rectal cancer. 45% of adults 59 and younger are obese. So this is a huge thing. And up to 80% of cancer patients have type 2 diabetes or impaired glucose tolerance at the time of diagnosis. So think about that. Pancreatic cancer is a huge killer. And if you have insulin resistance, if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have impaired glucose tolerance, if you're on that spectrum of poor metabolic health, you're driving a dramatic increase in the risk of getting pancreatic cancer. Studies also show that diabetes significantly increases the risk of cancer and that many people who have cancer have a high rate of diabetes. Now, there's 38 million adults, about 1 in 10 who have diabetes. In some populations, it's a lot more like the African Americans, Hispanic populations, and the Native Americans. 100 million people have prediabetes. I think it's probably way more than that. It's very conservative. 1 in 3 are basically Americans. If you look at that's based on this very strict criteria, but if you look at more detailed criteria of insulin resistance, it's probably affecting over 90% of Americans, which is, probably 300 million people. So it's scary. The incidence of type 2 diabetes has been going up by about 5% every year since 2002 in young people, not in older people who used to get it. So what do most chronic diseases have in common? Well, these chronic diseases and aging itself and cancer all have in common something called insulin resistance. I co-founded a company called Function Health so you can access your data and learn about your own blood work and lab tests and find out if you indeed have any degree of insulin resistance by measuring insulin levels, A1C, blood sugar, lipoprotein fractionation, measure inflammation levels, nutritional levels, all things that play a big role in cancer risk. And we're going to talk a little bit about what testing you should get, but you can go to functionhealth.com/Mark and jump the wait list. It's about 200,000 people on that, but you can jump it if you want to look at what really is going on. And we need to do this. And there's even newer, more sensitive testing called an insulin resistance score that's available through Quest that actually is very sensitive and can pick up insulin resistance way before any other test. Now, why is insulin bad? Well, it's a growth hormone. It can bind to malignant cells, which often overexpress insulin receptors, and it can also cause cancer cells directly to grow. High insulin levels can also increase the production of something called IGF-1, or insulin growth factor 1. Or insulin-like growth factor 1. And now it's a hormone that increases cell division and growth and inhibits something called autophagy, which is what you need to clean up old damaged cells, which is what's happening when you're preventing yourself from getting cancer. I mean, all of us have cancer right now in our body. Just realize that. Everybody does. But if our immune system's working, it's surveying the landscape, it's finding those cancer cells, it's sending out the natural killer cells to hunt and destroy, and usually we're good. But if we don't have this process of improving our immune system by having the proper lifestyle and diet, and I detail this all in my book, Young Forever, then we're going to get in trouble. Now, high blood sugar is a huge issue. High blood sugar is a huge issue in cancer cases. High blood sugar is found in 39 to 99% of cancer cases, and that leads to insulin resistance, to free radicals, or oxidative stress, and more inflammation. Now, what about alcohol? Alcohol is a big problem. 750,000 global cases of cancer in 2020 could be directly attributed to alcohol, according to a study published in Lancet. Now, we're going to put all the references, everything I'm saying, there's links, there's references, there's scientific data. I'm just not making this stuff up. So you can check in the show notes for that. Now, while heavy drinking accounted for most of the cancers. Even light to moderate drinking accounted for about 100,000 cases. So how does alcohol increase cancer risk? Well, according to international bodies that look at carcinogens, it's a group 1 carcinogen, according to the IARC. Now, when alcohol or ethanol is metabolized in the body, it's first converted to something called acetaldehyde. It's a highly reactive and a toxic compound. Now, acetaldehyde can cause DNA damage. It can produce harmful mutations that lead to cancer. It also interferes with DNA repair mechanisms. Now, alcohol metabolism in cells, particularly the liver, leads to the production of reactive oxygen species. It damages also your cellular components like lipids, proteins, DNA, and it promotes inflammation. It also impairs the absorption of really important nutrients like vitamin A and C and D and folate, as well as increases the excretion of minerals that you need for your immune system. So you can see alcohol causes cancer in all sorts of ways. It also can increase circulating estrogen levels. So the more alcohol you drink, the higher estrogen level, even if you're a man. And it's a risk factor for breast cancer. And we're even seeing breast cancer in men now because of the increase in estrogen in their bodies because of the extra fat that they accumulate. And fat produces estrogen. Now, one of the major modifiable risk factors for breast cancer is getting rid of alcohol. For every 10 grams of alcohol per day, which is about 1 drink, the risk for breast cancer goes up 10%. The average risk, if you, for example, a woman, you have 1 glass of wine a day, it increases your risk of breast cancer by 40%. Now, chronic alcohol consumption also causes other problems, right? So you're a little bit, you're getting a risk, right? But there's more aggressive use of alcohol that can cause liver cirrhosis, scarring of the liver, and that's another big risk factor for liver cancer. Alcohol also damages mucous membranes in the mouth, the throat, the esophagus, the larynx, the stomach, and the colon and the rectum. And that's why it increases the risk of all these digestive cancers. 30 grams or more, which is about 3 drinks per day of alcohol, increases the risk of colorectal cancer. And the problem is alcohol consumption increased during the pandemic, which maybe has led to the rise in cancers we're seeing after the pandemic, or maybe due to COVID. We're not sure if the coronavirus some way creates this chronic low-grade inflammatory state that increases cytokines. Even when the virus seems to be over, there's this lingering effect of long COVID. And that may be why we're seeing this increase in cancer risk and rates after COVID. Also, nutrient deficiencies are a big factor. And in fact, having adequate vitamin D levels is protective against cancer. So you need to get your levels tested. You need to know your numbers because you can't just guess. You can't know what your vitamin D level is because some people need more or less. Most people are deficient. And vitamin D is so critical because it has so many cancer-fighting functions within the body. And there's also a large body of evidence that vitamin D is so protective against cancer and that low vitamin D is a huge risk factor for getting cancer, and having high vitamin D is a big factor in reducing the risk of most types of cancer. So how does vitamin D work to fight cancer? Well, it inhibits cancer cell growth and proliferation. It reduces cancer metastases or the spread of cancer. It stimulates the maturation of healthy cells, so it makes your cells turn into normal cells. It induces the death of cancer cells, what we call apoptosis or programmed cell death. That's a good thing. It prevents the blood vessel growth in tumors or angiogenesis. It prevents inflammation associated with cancer, and it reduces the incidence and or death due to cancer. So basically, it lowers the chance of getting it and of dying from it. Women with a mean vitamin D serum level greater than or equal to 40 nanograms had a 71% lower risk of cancer than women with serum levels less than 20. And that was looked at over a period of about 4 years for all invasive cancers combined, excluding skin cancer. Maybe that's because they go in the sun. Now, that's just stunning to me. And in most lab reference ranges, say 20 is normal. Some have moved up to 30, but certainly 40 is considered a higher end level of vitamin D, according to most lab reference ranges, because the reference range is 20 or 30, not 50, which is probably what it should be. Colorectal cancer is another big factor in vitamin D. Meta-analysis of many randomized controlled trials report a 30% reduction in disease progression or death from colorectal cancer among patients who supplemented with vitamin D. So even if you had cancer and you took vitamin D, it seemed to reduce your risk. Another meta-analysis of 15 studies in 14 countries reported a dose-response relationship between serum vitamin D level and the risk for colorectal cancer. So the more elevated your vitamin D level was, the lower your risk of colon cancer. 30 nanograms was associated with a 33% lower risk of colorectal cancer. But if your level was 50, which is, I think it should be 50 or more, it was associated with a 60% lower risk of colorectal cancer. So most reference ranges say 30 is, quote, the bottom limit of normal, but I don't think that's normal. I think that's suboptimal. What else can cause cancer? Well, our sedentary lifestyle. Exercise is one of the best tools that we have to prevent cancer. It's anti-inflammatory. It produces all sorts of antioxidants. It supports your blood and lymph flow and helps balance your blood sugar, helps you detoxify. It's great, right? Everybody knows exercise is good for them. And a sedentary lifestyle means we're missing out on all the benefits for physical, metabolic, hormonal, and overall health. So you got to exercise. Just don't worry about it. Now, what else might be going on? Well, up to 10% of cancers may be genetic, but just because you have the genes doesn't mean you're going to get the cancer for sure. In fact, there was this twin study, I think it was in Denmark, it was 88,000 twins, 44,000 twin pairs. And they looked at cancer in that group and they found only 10% of cancers kind of matched with identical twins. So 90% is environmental. That's a pretty depressing bunch of news, right? Cancer risk is going up. It's younger people. There's all these things that cause cancer. The coronavirus. I'm like, what are we going to do, right? Well, the good news is we know a lot about how to lower our risk. So what would be a coherent and a comprehensive functional medicine approach? Well, first you need to do testing because you don't want to guess. You want to test. And you want to look at testing that indicates your risk of cancer. For example, insulin, very important. Fasting insulin is a highly predictive of insulin resistance. And there's actually a newer test that Quest is doing called insulin resistance score, which combines an insulin test with a C-peptide test. That's a precursor of insulin and looks at the ratio. And it's using a very sophisticated measurement called mass spectrometry, much more accurate than what you get in a regular blood test. So this is the test I'm going to be using for all my patients because even is better than anything else we're using right now. Also, you need to look at lipid panel to see if you have insulin resistance through lipoprotein fractionation, your blood sugar, your A1C, as we talked about, your blood count, which can detect many blood cancers, a whole nutritional analysis because vitamin D, omega-3s, B vitamins like folate, B12, and B6 affect cancer risk, zinc, iron, magnesium, looking at inflammation levels with CRP, cortisol, looking at metabolic factors like leptin, uric acid, which we talked about, sex hormones. If your estrogens are really high, it may be a factor. Fatty liver also drives cancer risk. So looking at your liver enzymes, heavy metals, all these things can be done with our test called Function Health Test. And as I mentioned before, I co-founded a company called Function Health to allow easy access to testing without going through a doctor insurance. It's $15,000 worth of test for less than $500. And it's twice a year testing with a membership model. And you can learn all this about yourself. In fact, we also have a test available there called Gallery by Grail, which is a liquid biopsy of 50 different cancers that is highly predictive of what's going on, less than a 0.5% false positive rate, which is far lower than most other screening tests like mammograms and so forth. And it also is accurate about 70% of the time, meaning 75% of the time you have a cancer, it'll pick it up. Now, it'll miss maybe very early ones, but it's actually better than most screening tests and picks cancer up a year or two or even 3 before you'd see it on any other screening test. And that's part of our offering with Function Health. And we've already picked up a significant number of cancers and saved many lives as a result of this early testing. And it's in young people too. And I recommend doing it every year as a screening test. It's well worth the effort and the time and the money. And you can learn more about Function. You can go to functionhealth.com/Mark. And there's other things you might want to do as well, like stool analysis, looking at genetics, looking at even toxin levels in your cells. I've been recently using a lab in Germany called IGL that does deep toxin testing and mitochondrial testing and looks for DNA damage, and very, very helpful. And then you need to do that with a physician who understands that, a functional medicine doctor. But first you got to test and see what's going on, and you got to correct all those things. And those are all treatable things. So what can we do in addition to testing to lower our risk of cancer? Well, many cancers are lifestyle related. And according to the WHO, an estimated between 30 to 50% of cancer cases are preventable through a healthy lifestyle and avoiding occupational carcinogens and environmental toxins. So that's a lot. I mean, think about it. You can cut up to 50% of cases down by simply living a healthy lifestyle and avoiding toxins. Pretty good. Now, I mean, you have to know what to avoid, right? And it's not that hard, right? Don't smoke, don't drink. Or if you drink, keep it to a bare minimum, because we know that there's really not even a safe level, even in red wine. Also food, right? Just get your diet sorted out. I mean, I think if you're listening to me, you probably already know that I'm very passionate about food as medicine, and you want to eat the right drugs and you want to avoid the wrong drugs, right? Because food can heal, but food can harm. And you want to make sure you're eating the foods that are healing, not harmful. So obviously avoiding ultra-processed food, starch, sugar, refined grains, all those things. I mean, if you're going to have grains, don't have them refined. If you're going to have starch, don't have too much. Have sugar occasionally as a treat. Obviously, don't eat fast food. Don't eat sugar-sweetened beverages. Don't eat hot dogs, hamburgers, low-quality meats. I mean, if it's obviously grass-fed hamburger, that's fine. Dairy products also may be increasing the risk of cancers through their load of hormones that are naturally in them, as well as hormones that can be added. There's also pesticides, and try to eat organic when you can. So just be smart. I don't eat anything that comes in a package with a long list of ingredients you can't pronounce. I mean, I did a whole Health Bite episode on ultra-processed foods. We're going to link to it in the show notes. Artificial sweeteners. Interestingly, it's listed by the IARC, which is an international body that looks at carcinogens, classified aspartame as a group 2B carcinogen, which is possibly carcinogenic to humans, including equal NutraSweet. No reason to really have those artificial sweeteners. If you want a little stevia or monk fruit, that's fine, but stay away from all the weird stuff. A reduced fructose intake, not in the form of fruit, but in the form of table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, ultra-processed food, liquid fructose, and things like soda, fruit juice, not okay. Whole fruit is okay. It has all the fiber, the phytonutrients, polyphenols, it makes it fine. Obviously, don't eat fried foods, charred foods, sugary sauces, and barbecued foods. Those will cause the advanced glycation end products. They raise your A1C. Of course, what you should eat is real food, right? Keep your blood sugar balanced with a low glycemic, anti-inflammatory diet. Get lots of disease-fighting phytochemicals and antioxidants, which come from plants. In fact, the Lancet paper reported that a low intake of vegetables and fruit, along with other dietary risk factors, led to about 11 million deaths a year. And that is not just not having the protective foods, but also eating a lot of processed food. And about 255 million years of disability-adjusted life in 2017. So whether it kills you or not, it's going to make you sick and unhealthy and feel bad. Just try to cook more meals at home. Eat out less. Eat a variety of whole, colorful plant foods. More color, more benefit, right? That's where all the phytochemicals are. Eat fruit, but have low glycemic fruit that's got lots of fiber, polyphenols, berries of all kinds, pomegranate, apples, stone fruits like plums and nectarines, peaches, cherries. And don't eat high glycemic fruits a lot, right? If you're diabetic, though, for sure, but things like pineapple, melons, things like that, grapes, not so great. Eat plenty of fiber, at least 30 grams, but probably 50 grams a day is where to shoot for, ideally. And that keeps your microbiome healthy, prevents cancer. Make most of your plate non-starchy veggies. Eat foods that help you detox environmental toxins like the cruciferous vegetable family, bok choy, kale, cauliflower, broccoli, collard greens, dandelion greens. Have whole grains and legumes, but make sure you have the ones that are not full of glyphosate and sprayed, and don't definitely, if you want to eat wheat, have wheat berries that are regeneratively grown. don't eat the modern dwarf wheat, which is just full of gliadin and inflammatory compounds. You also want to make sure you reduce your toxic exposures, right? Water filter, air filter. Don't use plastic stuff. Go to EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group, to really dive into all the resources they have to help you reduce your exposure to toxins in your food, your household cleaning products, your skincare products, your food, everything. Make sure you focus on simple changes that can make a profound difference over time. It's not the one big thing you're going to do. It's all the little things that add up over time. But I think the good news is we know now a lot of what causes cancer. We can do a lot to prevent it. And we need to be basically the CEOs of our own health. So check out your lab tests at functionhealth.com/Mark. I wouldn't get too depressed about it because there's so much now we can do, especially with the Grail gallery testing for liquid biopsies. That made me feel a lot better because I have basically my mother had some cancer. My father died of cancer. My sister died of cancer. So I deeply understand the concern about cancer, and I definitely don't want it. So I'm going to get that test every year. So by understanding these trends and making good health choices, we can really all take great steps for preventing cancer and promoting longevity in our own life and our community. So stay informed, stay proactive. Let's use this knowledge to positively impact our health and the health of future generations. And I'll see you next time on the podcast. If you loved that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.